This infamous 15th century Breton baron may have been France's first and most prolific serial killer, believed to have murdered as many as 140 children. Welcome back to Historical Horror, a series in which I draw upon my two absolute favorite subjects to bring you the strangest, creepiest, darkest tales from our past. Today, we're talking about the Bloody Baron, Gilles de Retz. History loves a good fall from grace, and few fell harder or deeper than Gilles de Retz. Seriously, like straight into hell. So let's look at how this wealthy noble and celebrated knight went from Joan of Arc's right-hand man to one of history's earliest recorded serial killers. I wasn't even going to do this one today, but then I realized it's October 26th, which happens to be Gilles de Retz's death day, so it only seemed appropriate. Gilles de Retz was born around 1404 to families with impeccable noble pedigree. In fact, the Baron de Retz were considered the oldest barons in the entire Duchy of Brittany. After being orphaned around the age of 11, he was put into the guardianship of his maternal grandfather, Jean de Craon, against the express wishes and the official will of his father. Seems dad had some misgivings about grandpa's parenting, mentoring skills. Misgivings which would be proved very warranted, actually. Grandpa Jean ended up being a bad influence on the young Gilles de Retz, and the two got up to all sorts of political and military shenanigans together. A young, hot-blooded, entitled noble with a concerning aggressive streak, Gilles de Retz might have gone off the rails a lot earlier than he did, if not for a fortunate redirection of his energies in early adulthood. That is, to the French cause in fighting the occupying English. In the first half of the 15th century, as in the previous century, England and France were embroiled in the bitter conflict known as the 100 Years' War. And at the moment, the English definitely had the temporary advantage. In the early 15th century, the English occupied significant French territory. This would end up giving Gilles de Retz an outlet for his aggression. During the late 1420s, Gilles distinguished himself as a captain of the French army, and he would soon be recognized as a national hero for his role as companion in arms to Joan of Arc. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Joan in many of her most celebrated victories against the English. He was instrumental in lifting the siege at Orléans and at Lagny. He accompanied Joan on the Loire campaign, which saw the liberation of several important French strongholds that had previously been under English occupation. It was only because of their victories that Charles VII was able to at last be crowned King of France in July of 1429. In recognition of his military accomplishments, the new king elevated Gilles to the lofty title of Marshal of France, the country's highest military distinction. Many historians have noted how the fate and fortune of Gilles de Retz and Joan of Arc seem to mirror each other. And indeed, following Joan's infamous execution in 1431, de Retz's star likewise begins to fade. A series of shakeups at the French court sees him lose the prestigious marshalship of France to a member of a rival political faction. And with the English now largely in retreat, his military career sort of grinds to a halt. To fill the void, he goes on a tear of bad behavior. He spends excessively and recklessly, squandering his fortune on stupid shit, then selling off his ancestral lands in order to maintain his extravagant lifestyle. He becomes embroiled in a whole bunch of messy political and dynastic intrigue, and basically spends much of the 1430s running around the Duchy of Brittany making a nuisance of himself, roughing up rivals and enemies, laying claim to properties he had sold, then decided he wanted back. All of this mischief sees him fall out of favor with Charles VII, and eventually he's forced to retreat from military and political life entirely. So he withdraws from public life and turns inward. In the worst way imaginable. He becomes obsessed with the occult, begins engaging in alchemy, sorcery, and eventually even demonology in efforts to rebuild his depleted wealth and power. But he's most infamously remembered for his implication in the mass murder of children. While their feudal lord is over in his castles immersed in his dark pursuits, many of the local peasants begin to notice that quite a few children are going missing. Poor peasant children who would go begging at one of de Retz's castles and never be seen again. Young boys who would secure a service position in de Retz's household and never emerge. Witnesses even began to spot de Retz's servants disposing of bodies in the dead of night. Of course, the disappearance of so many children could hardly go unnoticed, and that de Retz was the one behind the disappearance was widely accepted among the local populace. But he was also their feudal lord and landlord. Given the low position of the victims and their families, parents of the missing children had no means of seeking justice. De Reil's reign of terror lasted almost a decade, and it may well have continued if he hadn't gotten himself in some hot water after attempting to forcibly take back a castle he had previously sold and assaulting an important clergyman in the process. This prompted the opening of a secret ecclesiastical investigation. And it was during this investigation that inquisitors learned about the reports of the many, many missing children. De Reil's crimes finally caught up with him in September of 1440. He was arrested along with several alleged accomplices and imprisoned to await trial. De Reil was prosecuted in both secular and ecclesiastical courts, tried for a whole litany of offenses, including murder, heresy, sorcery, and the invocation of demons. For 3 weeks, a seemingly endless stream of parents and local witnesses took the stand to testify against him, telling heart-rending stories of their lost children. In all, he was accused of abducting, abusing, and murdering 140 children. But some say that's a conservative number. Other estimates have put the death count as high as 800 victims. Under threat of excommunication and torture, De Reil eventually confessed, stating that he, quote, maliciously committed and perpetuated all the charges he was accused of. When officials asked him if he had anything further to say, he at first said no, but then, quote, with great contrition of heart and a great effusion of tears, he spilled out every dark secret. He then went on to describe in grotesque detail the horrors he had inflicted upon his victims. De Reil blamed his crimes on the laxity of his upbringing under his maternal grandfather, and asked that his confession be printed in French as a warning to parents. Though whether this was a true, genuine confession made out of fear for his immortal soul, or some kind of pressure-induced performance, or at least embellishment, is hard to say. Gilles de Reil was executed on October 26, 1440, hanged over a blazing pyre, and then left to burn. His story still lingers like a nightmare in historical record, all of his military accomplishments and distinctions forever overshadowed by this black specter of infamy. So, happy death day to Gilles de Reil, I guess. Good riddance.